All right, I'm Ellis Boisvert. This is my senior project proposal called Public Community. And what I'm going to be looking at is the COVID-19 outbreak that we've had worldwide. It's the largest outbreak we've had in 100 years. And the US has taken the largest amount of measures that it has in the case of a worldwide pandemic that it ever has in its whole history. And I think there's a lot of issues that come with our plan to mitigate and deal with a disease outbreak that has led to a lot of social unrest and public health issues. And I think that it could have been handled a lot better, and we were very ill prepared. And what we have learned is that the amount of social angst and dissatisfaction that has occurred is a very, very large aspect of having a disease framework that can handle an issue as large as this, and the amount of repercussions that we had because of this social aspect has led to, not completely, but a lot of riots currently, and a lot of different protests on a lot of different matters, which I'm not going to really talk about because we're living through it right now. And this is acting as a really good case study for this whole project. And I think that it's something that we should really focus on, and something that's really important, because we thought we were invulnerable as the United States. We're really naive to think that we couldn't be affected by this, because that's just how the United States works. And thought that was a really big problem, and the government's really not stepping up to handle this problem as they should. But with this project, hopefully we can find some sort of solution that can handle this, keep people at ease, and keep the public health at some semblance of normality. And yeah, so the city has decided to look at for this project is San Francisco, because it takes great pride in its community. It's really progressive. There's a lot of diversity there. And I think that would be a good representation to show how this plan can deal with a lot of different varying circumstances. It's also a huge hub for travel. A lot of people are going through there all the time. And that would be a great place to exhibit this kind of plan. So I mentioned our naivety in just now, and I think I'm a personal example of that. When I saw it starting in China, I was like, oh, there's no way that's ever going to get to the United States, but it did, and it just showed how ill-prepared we are. And yeah, so the approach to this design is going to start on pre-quarantine. I guess that's a very large step in this process, is the quarantine, and that's been like fairly effective. But the before quarantine aspect is really important, and how we can prepare for that. So I want to focus on how the disease arteries can be segmented and allow for a disease to not travel along those arteries for a long distance, because that's the way it travels, and how those arteries can be segmented so that the disease will be contained in a certain location, not allowed to spread farther than that. But that works for diseases that have some sort of transmission type other than through human contact, so through water, through air, or through feces. Those are three major ones. Though they still can be transmitted through human contact, segmenting those non-human methods of transmission is going to be really important. So the first issue is also going to deal with some other types of issues, like this toilet paper shortage and the shortage of essential living materials, which was something that I didn't really expect to happen in think people would go that crazy, but they did. So that's something that's really important and something that needs to be addressed because a lot of people couldn't get what they needed and a lot of people had way too much of what they needed. So that's something that's really important. The second issue, we'll look at the open space plan of San Francisco, and this is going to deal with more of the social aspect of keeping people at ease and how that can be accomplished through the use of the open space plan and allowing people to build up their own immune systems, because that's also really important because people in quarantine aren't building their immune systems. They're a lot more susceptible to getting sick and staying sick and suffering in, at a greater cost than people who already have a good immune system. So bolstering people's immune systems and engaging in more social activities than what we're currently used to in the face of this disease, which seems like it's going to go on for a little while. Some of the goals and objectives are to minimize the ability for disease to spread along these arterial pathways, which I just mentioned. Another is to ensure availability of essential living items, which I also just mentioned. Third is to create an initial response plan, which is kind of the baseline for a disease framework and something that can be built upon. The fourth goal is to create a safer connection from home to accessible open space, which I also just talked about. And then the last one is to create levels of disease resilience response strategies, which respond to current information and data. And that's something that's really important because right now there's a lot of dishonesty, there's a lot of false truths in the media about how this disease is working. People are focusing on like where it comes from and whether it's like made in a lab by humankind, which honestly is a little irrelevant at this point because it's out there and people are suffering. We don't have a good plan for it, and our plan isn't evolving or being flexible to respond to actual data and actual knowledge about this disease. And this disease response framework needs to be flexible at the tip of a hat, and people need to get with the program, and based on like levels of severity, how deadly or how contagious a certain disease is, people need to be able to respond straight away. And so creating a disease resilience response plan that is flexible based on current data is really important, and having some sort of tree which can, you can pick a pathway based on what sort of disease and what sort of problem you're facing is going to be really important, because you can't just have one plan, stick to that one plan, because diseases are really different, they're really unique, and each one is a different kind of issue. It's not just like disease is one issue, you can handle it this way. There's a lot of different measures that need to be taken and a lot of different ways that one could respond. So that's really important. Here's a map of San Francisco. It shows the uniqueness of each area, and I think I'm going to try to create a metric that judges based on population density and different demographics in order to categorize these and rank them as to what level of disease response would be most effective in each of those areas. Some maps, the green space, the green connections, which are going to be very important for the second issue that I talked about with the social satisfaction aspect. Here's some more population, seniors, different demographics, income demographics, potential for added population growth. So we're projecting into the future and looking at which areas are the most susceptible and the people that are most susceptible to a certain disease with like lowered immune system. The seniors, obviously, population density, more likely to transmit the disease. Here's some site photos currently in San Francisco. The bottom one's not, but the top one is. And that just goes to show that people need that social connection in order to feel okay. And that's a really big thing that I think was overlooked. And it led to people just completely going against the quarantine, and the rates of transmission, I'm sure, are going to go up very soon. Here's some contrasting photos before and after, just showing like a ghost town almost in the bottom one. These are some of the case studies I looked at, which this is CDC resilience plan that or framework that they've contrived, which is more based on environmental climate change and those health effects rather than like something that would directly affect the health like a disease. This is the virtual power plant, which shows how different utilities can be segmented and decentralized, which I think would be really important for like water and septic systems. So the disease transmission pathways can be segmented completely. And here's a very interesting way to provide food at a local level, neighborhood level, called Freight Farms, which just maximizes the yield for cubic foot of space for food. Here are some studies on disease transmission that were conducted in Bangladesh, and this one's based on cholera and shigellosis, and this one's based on the dengue fever. So a few different methods of transmission. This is through insects, and this is through water and feces, and it shows the connection between like people and the proximity to each other, as well as the water sources and how those are connected. This is the growing pains adaptive cycle, which shows how like the process that is necessary for change, and it involves a lot of exploitation and innovation and conservation, but it's a painful process, and that's something that I have to look into in a little more detail. The 6-word memoir, Next Time You Won't Be Alone, which I think is really important, and something that's pretty core to the project that I'm looking at, because I really want to focus on how we can foster social connectivity between people, because their happiness is really important and their hope is really important, and that's something that will keep people looking to the future and not just cracking under the pressure of such a great global issue that we're dealing with currently. Some of the rhetorical questions: one, how will people interact and treat each other after this pandemic, and how will that affect how public space is used, and how can public spaces evolve to meet that new standard, which I think is an important question, because currently people don't really want to touch each other, be associated with each other. In some places where people are a lot more afraid of their own health being compromised, and with that like in the back of our head, you never know how people are going to act. I think that's something that should be looked at, and if public spaces don't change, then that's okay, but public spaces need to accommodate for people's sense of mind, and if their sense of mind changes, then public spaces should change too. And that's it. Thank you. My name is Ellis. Good luck out there.